If you're submitting budget proposals for law enforcement agencies, for an intelligence agency, you're not going to submit a proposal saying that we won the war on terror and everything's great. Because that's the first thing that's going to happen to your budget. It's going to be cut in half. You know, it's my opposite of Jesse Jackson's keep hope alive. It's keep fear alive. Keep it alive. This quote single-handedly is the FBI's terrorism strategy. Keep fear alive. And it drives everything they do. The quote I mentioned at the beginning were the words of former Assistant Director of the FBI, Thomas Fuentes, in which he said, after defending one of the infamous FBI terror sting operations. Inshallah, today I will dive into the topic of manufacturing terrorism, what it is, how it's manufactured, who's the sponsor or creator, and how it's dealt with. And when I speak of manufacturing terrorism, I'm not talking in the general sense of worldwide. We are talking specifically about domestic terrorism in this country. The word terrorism, as we know today, is used exclusively only for Muslims, for any acts of terrorists. So the stories I will share, some of the cases, they all deal with Muslims, unfortunately. If I were to tell you that one of the biggest threats in this country is the FBI, what would your reaction be? I can suggest that they are one of the biggest threats because they are the perpetrators in manufacturing terrorism. And this is not a blanket statement. There's hundreds of cases, stories to suggest the truth in this matter. You see, informant-led operations by the FBI are central to the FBI's counterterrorism program. Of the 508 defendants prosecuted in federal terrorism-related cases in the decade after 9/11, 243 were involved with an FBI informant, while 158 were the targets of a sting operation. Of those cases, an informant, or the FBI undercover operative, left 49 defendants in their terrorism plots. And this was a stat that was outlined earlier this year by The Intercept. The FBI, in doing this for over a decade, they developed a bit of a pattern, a system. First, they target a Muslim, not due to any evidence or intent or capability to engage in terrorism, but rather for the radical political views he expresses. In most cases, the Muslim targeted by the FBI is a very young, late teens, early 20s, an unemployed loner who has shown no signs of mastering life, basic life function, let alone carrying out a serious terror attack, and has no involvement with actual terrorist groups at all. They then find another Muslim who is highly motivated to help disrupt a terror plot, either because they are being paid substantial sums of money by the FBI, or because they are charged with some unrelated crime, and they're desperate to please the FBI for leniency or both. The FBI then gives the informant a detailed attack plan, and sometimes even the money and other instruments to carry it out, and the informant shares all of this with the target. Typically, the informant induces, baits, persuades the target to agree to carrying out the FBI designed plot. In some instances where the target doesn't go along with it, they have their informant offer huge cash allotments to the target. Once they finally get the target to agree, the FBI swoops in last minute, arrests the target, issues a press release praising themselves for disrupting a dangerous attack, which it conceived of, funded, and recruited the operatives for. And the DOJ and federal judges send their target to prison for years on decades. Subservient U.S. courts uphold charges by applying such a broad and permissive interpretation of entrapment that it could almost never be successfully invoked. And there you have it. That is how the FBI is able to manufacture terrorism in this country. They create it and then publicly praise themselves for stopping their own plots. Aside from the FBI, The other keywords in what I just described are informants and targets, which fall under the umbrella of sting operations. And this is exactly what these cases are. They are sting operations. Let's discuss the target or the victim, for the most part, in these sting operations. Post 9/11, there was a scare of another attack on U.S. soil, so the FBI and the intelligence communities, their fear were more along the lines of a lone wolf committing some type of atrocity in this country. So the FBI, taking that into account, built that around the strategy of manufacturing terrorism. So in most cases, the target of a sting operation had little or no means of financial stability, had mental health problems, or was a loner in life, and the like. And this made it easy pickings for the FBI in setting up these operations. Now, the informant, on the other hand, could come on the FBI payroll through other means. Some of those means were criminals turned informants by getting out of jail early or charges being dropped. Another was putting a person on the no-fly list and leveraging that against an individual. Another is using the visa status and threatening deportation of an individual until they agree to become an informant. And lastly, things such as extramarital affairs have been used and leveraged against an individual to get them on their side in becoming an informant. So to become an informant, you not only would have to agree with the FBI wants to do in carrying out their actions, you also have to pass a lie detector test, to later prove in court that you are a truthful person and to prove to the FBI you are truthful. Funny as it sounds, in a few cases, some informants didn't even pass the lie detector test, but they still made it onto the payroll of the FBI to be used as a valuable asset in sting operations. Informants were given financial compensation for taking part in the operation and even had incentives such as getting the rent paid, bonuses, incentive payouts for a guilty verdict of a target, sometimes amounted to 6 figures. Now, I was doing research. The one thing that struck out to me was the fact that this smells like entrapment. Sure, it does. It has the makings of it with the FBI involved, paid informants, hand-picked targets, the FBI providing the idea, money, the weaponry, you name it, and creating the plot. I was wondering why none of the sting operations were ever overturned or defended as entrapment. In theory, the defendants in these cases should be able to avoid criminal liability by making a claim of entrapment. However, U.S. law requires that to prove entrapment, a defendant must show both that the government induced him to commit the crime, the act in question, and what he was not predisposed to commit. The predisposition inquiry focuses attention on the defendant's backgrounds, opinions, beliefs, reputations. In other words, not on the crime, but on the nature of the defendant. This character inquiry makes it exceptionally difficult for a defendant to succeed in raising the entrapment defense, particularly in the terrorism context where inflammatory stereotypes and highly charged characterizations of Islam and foreigners often prevail. Another interesting note I've also found out in my research, that a lot of the times in which the FBI could be held liable or an informant as far as entrapment goes, there was some type of recorder malfunction as quoted by the FBI. Funny, isn't it? They're able to capture everything, audio, video, to pin everything on the target, but when it comes to the part of the FBI being held liable or entrapping someone, those recordings never either get recorded or there's some type of malfunction with the thousands of dollars, hundreds of thousands of dollars I'm sure they spend on the equipment. Nowadays, I wouldn't be surprised if the NSA had a copy of those, conversations, but unless Snowden reveals more or there's another whistleblower from the FBI or NSA, we never probably hear those conversations. See, this is how the FBI manufactures terrorism. There's not much to it. It's really not that sophisticated, but they have found a working strategy. one that does wonders for them, their budget, and stirring the pot of fear. Now that I've highlighted the overall picture and the inner workings of how the FBI is able to manufacture terrorism, I want to share some stories of some first-hand accounts as documented by the Human Rights Watch and Columbia Law School's Human Rights Institute. This is an example of the FBI targeting people with mental or intellectual disabilities in stings. The target in this case was Rizwan Firdos. Although an FBI agent even told Firdos's father his son obviously had mental health problems, the FBI targeted him in an operation. They sent an informant to Firdos's mosque. Together, the FBI informant and Firdos devised a plan to attack the Pentagon and the U.S. Capitol, with the FBI providing fake weaponry and funding Firdos's travel. Yet, Firdos was mentally and physically deteriorating as the fake plot unfolded, suffering rapid weight loss, so severe his cheekbones protruded, loss of bladder control that left him wearing diapers, and depressions and seizures so bad his father quit his job to take care of Firdos. He was eventually sentenced on material support for terrorism and explosive charges to 17 years in prison with an additional 10 years of supervised release. Another example of an FBI-led operation involved Adil Daoud. Adil Daoud was a 17-year-old when undercover FBI employees began communicating with him through an online Islamic forum. At the time, Daoud was a reclusive student at an Islamic high school in Chicago suburb, spending most of his time on the computer in his parents' basement. He sought guidance from his parents for things about terms such as jihad that he was reading about online. His parents would tell him jihad is meant to struggle to be supportive of your parents. Yet online, undercover FBI employees slowly cultivated a fake plot with Daoud to attack a bar in downtown Chicago. Daoud's arrest in fall 2013 shocked his community and others in the Chicago area, prompting speculation about why the FBI deployed undercover agents to ensnare this teenager rather than contacting his parents or community leaders. These kids don't wake up one day and decide, I'm going to blow up society, a Muslim community advocate in Chicago said after the arrest. These are just two stories, and I can go on in how the FBI manufactures terrorism in this country, as there is a well-documented number of cases, and the pattern in all of them is eerily similar. Since 9/11, the FBI has expanded their counterterrorism program to the extent that as of 2013, they had a rough estimate of about 15,000 paid informants on the payroll, with most of them to infiltrate the Muslim communities across the country. Now, this is 10 times the amount of that of which J. Edgar Hoover had in his tenure as an FBI director. As I conclude, I want to reiterate one final point which I've had said numerous times, but I can't stress enough. The FBI in a bulk of terrorism-related cases in the country post 9/11 provided the means, the money, the weapons, and in most cases created the plot in these sting operations they praise themselves for. So it goes without saying, but you just can't thank the FBI enough for protecting us from terrorist plots they create and later stop. Lastly, I want to take an opportunity and commend those who have shed a lot of light on this topic, most notably investigative journalist Trevor Aronson, who is the author of the book, The Terror Factory, Inside the FBI's Manufactured War on Terrorism, in addition to the ACLU, Human Rights Watch, and The Intercept, which all helped me in understand how the sting operations work that I was able to share with you today. Thank you.